This is UNCCD COP 16, and we are here again in our second episode of our show, the Daily Digest. So, thank you very much for watching us through YouTube. And also, remember that you can make every comment you want, and we are going to, with our team, of course, to try to answer every question, for example, you have regarding the COP 16, the UNCCD COP 16 here in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. As usual, here at our daily digest, we start with our show with some tips for you guys to make your day easier. And the tip that, as a team, we are going to give you today is regarding with the aircon because it's freezing right now here inside the pavilion. Actually, outside the pavilions, when it's around afternoon, it's really cool. The temperature is around 27 degrees, and actually, this is the temperature which is going to be the maximum temperature today. But inside the pavilions, the aircons are working at its full capacity. So I really recommend you to grab a scarf or some jackets and to put your jacket on to have maybe a more comfortable day because otherwise you're going to be freezing. So that's is our first tip today before to start with this amazing day here at the UNCCD COP 16. All right, guys, all set. And today we turn an attention into land, one of the most important days here at the COP 16. But before we start with our guests, let's review some highlight key goals that we are going to review together right now. So the first one, in the next 5 years, we need to mobilize $2.1 trillion to support global and conservation and restoration and drought resilient efforts. That's the first one. The second one, investing in land conservation and restoration and drought mitigation isn't only good for people and planet. It makes financial sense with the returns of up to $30 for every dollar investment. And the third one, very important actually, the big goal is to take this message outside the high level meetings and involve people. I mean, the rest of the world. So the question is how we can involve the rest of the world, the people outside from the pavilions, with the meetings and the topics we are talking right now here at the UNCCD COP 16. And in order to answer that question, we have an amazing conversation with a key stakeholder. Okay, guys, it is my pleasure to welcome Susan Garner. She's the director of UNEP Land Programs. Thank you for joining us here today.
It's my pleasure.
So, Susan, I'm going to kick off this conversation with some words you said today at the opening ceremony of the Land Day here at the UNCCD COP 16. You said that intellectually we understand the urgency of the goals that we need to set here, but how do we ground this? So, that's the question. How do you think we can take action on that?
You know, you can walk around this conference and talk to a lot of different groups, whether it's government officials, private sector, NGOs, and there is a universal understanding that it's urgent to act. There's an understanding that we have to make progress on land degradation neutrality targets, and yet there is still this gap when it comes to actually grounding that into actions that have an impact on people's lives. Some of what we have to do is bring governments across different ministries and through the whole of society together to understand how each of them benefit from actions on nature and actions on reversing land degradation. And so, the more that we're able to show concrete examples of where successful restoration, successful protection of habitats in nature has actually benefited people, the more it's going to start getting grounded in terms of policies that will be good for today as well as for the future.
That's really amazing, and I really like to quote you because your opening ceremony was really cool, like the speech, and you also said it that the convention not only brings the world together but forces it to take to action. So the question is, how do you think?
How do we get from commitments to action?
Exactly.
You know, you see billboards everywhere saying we have to go from commitments to action, from promises to, work on the ground. Um, Part of the way we do it is by showing success stories. UNEP is a co-lead with FAO on the Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. And as part of that program, we celebrate flagships of restoration. Countries and other partners submit their proposals for restoration that has worked well. Where through following principles of good practices for restoration, they've been able to have inclusive processes where women are involved, where indigenous peoples are involved, where local economies are improved and livelihoods are created in ways so that people see the benefits of that work. This is the way that we'll get more buy-in from local communities. I just came from a side event where we were talking about nature for peace and how nature-based solutions can be part of actions towards creating, uh, reducing conflict and producing more security. And a person from the Ministry of Agriculture in Lebanon said people understand that nature is important, but they need to understand how it affects their family through these actions. But when they do, then they'll be supported because they'll see how they can improve their family, the nutrition of their children, their own livelihoods because of the actions that are taken in the forests outside their city.
Sometimes, regarding what you just said, sometimes the conversations are like too far from the people, like from the ordinary people or people from outside. For example, the pavilion here at the UNCCD COP16. So, how do you think we can involve like ordinary people or people from outside or from abroad in this conversation, which are really important to them and their families?
But we have to get the vocabulary right. So if we want to have conversations that are going to resonate with people in finance, we need to be able to talk in metrics that they understand in terms of the economic benefits. When we're talking to farmers, farmers understand the importance of biodiversity because they understand the need for pollinators. They understand the need for healthy soils and for regular rainfall. So fishermen and farmers are completely bought into an understanding that climate crisis is going to affect their own personal livelihoods as well as food security for the people they provide for. And so we have to get the vocabulary right so that we're speaking not just about the importance of the environment, the importance of nature, or the importance of articles that get into technical details of land degradation neutrality, but actually understand how that what that looks like through good examples of stories where this has worked.
It's really important, actually, what you said, like to put the eyes on the importance of the language and actually to talk to them in the real matters, right? And how this problem is going to affect them directly.
Yeah, I think a good example is we talk a lot about inclusive processes.
Yeah.
So we need to ensure local communities are involved, but also that they benefit and that they see those benefits. Because why would you invest your time and your own resources if you didn't understand how that's going to actually benefit the community? If all it feels like all the benefits are going somewhere else, we see examples for where we talk about women need to be empowered as part of the processes to make decisions about land stewardship, about land management. Women actually produce about 50% of the world's food. Women only own about 20% of land, but they make up about 70% of those that are hungry. And so we have this inequality. So when we begin to see that there are policies and there's data that actually takes into account the gender lens of the work we're trying to do, then all of a sudden women become empowered to be able to make the decisions. Women are already experts on climate and biodiversity. They're making decisions now about what to plant, when to plant it, where to plant it, but yet they're not empowered to actually be able to look at that in the long term. And so, as we see how we can empower women, automatically the rest will happen as they're able to actually be more effective stewards of the landscape.
Susan, and to finalize, it seems like all eyes are on Belen, the next COP
Yes.
next year, right? Because like most of the goals are set to 2025, which is next year at that COP. So, what do you think are your expectations for that COP?
Well, this year is the 30th anniversary of the UNCCD. And so we're celebrating 30 years of working to combat desertification and land degradation. Um, and we'll be looking next year. 2025 is going to be halfway through the decade. 5 years left to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. 5 years left for the Paris Agreement targets. Um, that's not a lot of time.
No.
And we know, we've learned in this time period what the solutions are. We understand the problems very well under all three of the Rio Conventions, which are the three conventions that came out of the Earth Summit 30 years ago on biodiversity, on climate, and here at UNCCD on desertification. We know what the drivers of those are, and we know the solutions, and we know how to access them. We also know that it requires a lot of financial support and figuring out how to bring those two together, the solutions, the people that need to act, and the resources there to support those actions. When we can bring those together, then we'll see the progress that we need. And 5 years isn't a lot of time, but it is enough time. It is enough time to reverse land degradation, to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, and to ensure that we're staying on track with the global biodiversity framework.
And last question. Thinking about those 5 years you mentioned, how important do you think is radical collaboration to achieve the goals?
Radical collaboration. You know, none of these problems can be resolved in isolation. You hear about silos all the time. Everyone's saying we've got to break down the silos. But there's a lot of silos in kind of every dimension you look at. So we have the three conventions that need to break down. We want to break down silos and sort of integrate work across climate, biodiversity, and land. That's essential because the solutions involve the same type of actions. The finance has to be integrated to be able to lift advancing on them together. We also see where we need collaboration across different sectors of society. So we need to ensure that agricultural value chains are looking at the effects that they have not only on biodiversity but on climate, on destroying landscapes, on all those things at the same time. Because if we can just take the pressure a bit off of nature and ecosystems, then nature will heal. This is what we're learning in the decade on ecosystem restoration. Nature will come back. Nature will produce. Nature will bring back all those ecosystem services that we rely on. And so, but we need to bring everybody together to make that happen. We have a great example in a program called Acción Andina, which is involving five countries from, including Chile, but also Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, and Argentina.
All the Andes.
And all across the Andes, and we are helping to restore Andean forests, which is actually creating livelihoods for local communities. 200 different local communities are seeing alternative livelihoods, but they're also seeing biodiversity come back, which is causing better security in terms of water resources and all of these benefits that the local communities themselves see. So when you ask about, okay, well, how do we ensure that you go from commitments to action? It's so that people see the results of that action and they're bought in to continue it and to invest more.
That's amazing, and that's amazing. You mentioned the Andes actually at the end of the interview. We were talking with Susan Garner. She's the director of UNEP. I know you have a really full agenda, so thank you very much for talking with me today here at Riyadh.
It's a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to you. All right, everybody, that's a wrap. Thank you very much for being with us in our show here at the UNCCD COP16. And remember that tomorrow we are going to be exploring Agri-Food Systems Day. And remember to subscribe to our LinkedIn newsletter. So thank you very much and see you tomorrow.